The year is 1349. You are in London, and you are one of the men they send to collect the dead. Think about the last time you dug a hole. In your garden, maybe. In sand at the beach, the satisfying resistance of packed earth giving way to a shovel's edge, the quiet, the ordinary small effort of it. Now, imagine that every day, from first light until your arms will no longer lift, you dig, not one hole, not five. You dig trenches, long ones, wide enough for a row of bodies, deep enough that you can barely see over the edge when you are standing inside them, and you fill them, and then you start again. That is your life now. You are what the city of London in 1349 would have called a bodyman. There is no formal title. There is no guild. There is no ceremony that marks you as something apart from the rest of the living. You simply do what others cannot bring themselves to do. You go to the houses where the knock on the door gets no answer. You go to the alleys where shapes have stopped moving. You go to the doorsteps where families have laid out their dead in the early morning hours because they cannot bear to keep them inside one more night. You pick them up, you carry them, you put them in the ground, and you do it again tomorrow. To understand why you exist, you have to understand what has come for Europe. The plague arrived in England in the summer of 1348, carried by rat fleas aboard Genoese trading ships that had passed through the Black Sea port of Caffa. It entered England at the port of Melcombe Regis in Dorset sometime around late June. By August it had reached Bristol, by autumn it was in London. By the following spring it would be in Scotland. By the time it finally burned itself out, it would kill somewhere between 30 and 60% of Europe's entire population. Historians and epidemiologists, including those who published in the journal Emerging Infectious Diseases in 2011, have estimated that England alone lost between a third and half of its people within the space of roughly 2 years. You do not have those numbers. You just have the bodies. London in 1349 is a city of maybe 60 to 80,000 people before the plague arrives. It is cramped, filthy by any modern standard, loud and alive in a way that medieval cities have a particular gift for. Cheapside is the main commercial artery, packed with butchers and cloth merchants and fishmongers. The Thames is a working river, thick with vessels. The narrow lanes between timber-framed houses are rarely more than 6 feet wide in places, and they are shared with pigs, chickens, and the runoff from upper-floor windows that you do not want to think about too hard. You grew up here, or somewhere like it. You know every street. You know the rhythm of the parish bells, the sound of the market at full cry, the particular way Londoners argue with one another in the street. This is your world, and right now, your world is dying. Your day begins before dawn. The cart is already loaded the night before with lime, because lime is one of the few things they know to put on the bodies. No one in 1349 understands germ theory. The word bacteria will not be coined for another 300 years. What people do understand is smell and rot and the sense, increasingly desperate and increasingly correct, that proximity to the dead is dangerous. So you use lime, and you move fast. Your first stop is wherever someone has marked a door. A white cross in many neighborhoods, sometimes just a cloth tied to a handle. The mark means plague is inside, or was inside, or that someone in the house has already died and the family does not know what else to do. You knock, sometimes someone answers. Sometimes they hand you a body wrapped in whatever cloth could be spared. Sometimes you go inside. Going inside is the part no one talks about when they tell stories of the Black Death. The textbooks give you statistics, the chronicles give you dramatic language. The Florentine writer Giovanni Boccaccio, who survived the plague in Florence in 1348 and later described it in the prologue to the Decameron, wrote about bodies lying in the streets, about fathers abandoning children, about the collapse of ordinary human bonds under the pressure of mass death. But Boccaccio was a writer. He was watching. You are the one who walks in. The smell inside a house where multiple people have died of bubonic plague is specific and total. It fills every room. It sits in the fabric of the walls. The bodies themselves show the signature marks. The buboes, swollen lymph nodes in the groin or armpit or neck that can grow to the size of an egg or larger, often rupturing and weeping before death. Black discoloration at the extremities, sometimes blood beneath the skin. The face, depending on how long death has been at work, is often unrecognizable. You wrap what remains. You carry it to the cart. You do not look at the faces more than you have to. There is a second form of plague, circulating in 1349 alongside the bubonic variety, and it is worse. Pneumonic plague attacks the lungs. It spreads through the air, through droplets when an infected person coughs. It kills in 2 to 3 days. Bubonic plague, bad as it is, kills in 3 to 5 days on average, but occasionally takes longer, giving a slender chance for survival that some people take. Pneumonic plague leaves almost no survivors at all. As a bodyman working among the infected and the dead, you are almost certainly being exposed to both. You do not get to wear a mask. The famous beaked mask associated with plague doctors, stuffed with herbs and flowers to filter the air, belongs to a slightly later era and to the physicians, not to the men doing the carrying. You have cloth, perhaps? Herbs tucked into your collar, as many people believed strongly that smells could fight smells. You have whatever superstition or prayer your particular form of faith provides. You have, possibly, a degree of natural immunity that you have no framework to explain and no way to know about. And you have the fact that someone has to do this. The collection routes through London in 1349 are not recorded in the way a modern city would document them. What we do have are the burial records, fragmentary and incomplete, and the accounts of chroniclers and the archaeological evidence. The Spitalfields mass grave, excavated beginning in the 1980s and analysed extensively in subsequent decades, contained the remains of hundreds of plague victims buried at the Priory of St. Mary Spital, just outside London's walls. The East Smithfield Black Death Cemetery, excavated in the 1980s and 1990s and studied by scholars, including Sharon DeWitt of the University of South Carolina, whose work on plague victim skeletal remains has told us enormous amounts about who died and why, contained at least 2 mass burial trenches running east to west, with individual graves placed around them. The trenches were organized, they were not panic. Someone dug them with care, or as much care as the circumstances allowed. That someone may have been you, or people like you. You reach East Smithfield in the mid-morning. The trench is already partially filled from previous days. You and the men working with you unload the cart. There is no ceremony. There is no priest for every body, though the church is trying desperately to maintain the rites. By 1349, the clergy are dying at the same rate as everyone else, and in some records at higher rates, because priests go to the sick when everyone else flees. Bishops across England are issuing emergency dispensations, allowing lay people to hear confessions, because the priests are gone. Archbishop John de Stratford of Canterbury dies in August 1348. His successor, John de Uford, dies in May 1349, before he can even be enthroned. Another successor, Thomas Bradwardine, dies in August 1349. The church is doing what it can. You are doing what no one else will. The pay, when there is pay, is poor. In some cities, there are records of wages rising sharply during the plague years because labour is suddenly scarce. An ordinary English labourer in the mid-14th century might expect to earn 1 or 2 pennies a day. By the late plague period, some wages have doubled or more, a trend so alarming to the surviving nobility and merchant class that Edward III issued the Statute of Labourers in 1351, specifically to cap wages at pre-plague rates. The law was unenforceable and widely ignored. But the bodyman, the gravedigger, the carter who hauls the dead, these are not skilled tradesmen negotiating from a position of newly discovered leverage. They are men at the bottom of an already desperate social order, doing work that marks them. Because that is the other thing about your job. You are marked by it. In London and in Paris and in Florence and in Siena and in every city the plague touches, the men who work among the dead are regarded with a particular kind of fear, not quite hatred, not quite pity. Something between the two. When you come home at the end of a day, if you have a home to come to, you keep your distance. You wash, if there is water. You strip your outer clothes. You have learned in a practical and wordless way that the people around you are afraid of what you carry with you, and they are not wrong to be afraid. You may carry it. You may carry it right now, in your blood and your breath, without knowing. Some bodymen sleep apart from their families. Some sleep in the cemeteries because it is less complicated than trying to navigate the fear. Some drink. There are records from this period across several European cities of alcohol consumption rising sharply among those working in close contact with the dead, which should not be surprising to anyone who has spent 5 minutes thinking about what that work requires. But you go back. Every morning you go back. There is something that happens to a person who spends months in proximity to this much death. It is not what you might expect. It is not that you stop caring. It is something harder to name, a kind of flatness, a recalibration of what feels real and what feels remote. The living, the people on the street who look away when you pass, seem somehow thin to you. The dead, in their absolute stillness, seem more solid. This is not madness. It is what happens when the border between the living and the dead becomes something you cross twice a day, 6 days a week on a cart. The medieval theologians of the period, including Jean de Vernet, a French Carmelite friar whose chronicle of the plague is one of the most detailed we have, wrote about the spiritual dimension of the catastrophe in terms of sin and punishment and the will of God. The astronomical conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in 1345 had been cited by the medical faculty at the University of Paris in a formal report to King Philip VI as a possible cause. The theories were many, and they were all wrong. But within the wrong theories, there is sometimes a strange insight, the idea that this was something visiting from outside, something that did not follow the ordinary rules of cause and effect, something that required a response not only from physicians, but from ordinary people doing extraordinary things. You are one of those people. By the time the worst of the Black Death passes in England, around 1350, the social order that existed before has been permanently fractured. The labor shortage created by mass death will eventually, over decades, contribute to the breakdown of the feudal system and the slow, painful emergence of something more recognizable to later eyes. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381 draws a direct line back to the plague years. The rise of English as a literary language, as Geoffrey Chaucer and his generation begin to write for an audience that is no longer just the French-speaking nobility, draws a line back to the plague years. The transformation of the church's authority draws a line back. The changes in land use, architecture, medicine, art, all of it draws a line back, and some of it draws a line back to you. To the men who went when others could not go, to the men who carried when others could not carry, to the men who dug when there was nothing left to do but dig. The specific names of the bogeymen of London in 1349 are almost entirely lost. This is not surprising. The people who write history are rarely the people who do the work history requires. We have the names of bishops and kings and merchants and scholars. We have the names of some plague victims recorded in wills and parish registers. We do not have the names of the men who cleared the path that made the future possible. But we know they were there. The bones in the trenches at East Smithfield were placed with care. Someone laid them that way. Someone straightened arms and turned heads. In the archaeological record, that care is visible. In some sections of the burial trenches, bodies were placed in orderly rows, positioned as if those doing the burying were trying to give the dead the dignity that the dying had denied them. That takes a particular kind of person. Think about what you do every day in your own life that others find too difficult. The conversation no one else wants to start. The problem everyone else walks past. The phone call that has been waiting for weeks because everyone in the family is hoping someone else will make it. Now scale that to its most extreme possible version. Make it your job, your daily reality, the thing you do before breakfast and after supper and in the dark hours in between. That is what a bodyman in 1349 does. Not because he is fearless. He is not fearless, not because he does not know the risk. He knows the risk better than anyone alive. He does it because someone has to, and because in some circumstances, that simple fact, that someone has to, is enough to get a person out of bed and into the cold morning air and onto the road that leads to the houses with the marked doors. There is something in that we have lost. The modern world has engineered itself ingeniously and at great cost to keep ordinary people away from ordinary death. Death happens in hospitals now, in hospices, behind closed doors, attended by professionals. The preparation of the body, the washing and the dressing, the sitting with the dead that was unremarkable to every generation before the 20th century, these have been outsourced to an industry. Most people alive today have never been in the same room as a dead person. The average person in medieval London had been in the same room as a dead person many times before they reached adulthood. This is not an argument for bringing death back into the living room. It is an observation about what distance costs. When you do not know death, you do not know life in the same way. You do not know what bodies are, what they were, what they carried when they were still moving through the world. You do not know, in a visceral and irreplaceable way, that time is real and limited and not something to be deferred. The bogeymen of 1349 knew this. They knew it better than almost anyone who has ever lived. The smell hits you before you even open your eyes, and every morning, you open them anyway.